Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. Most people are now aware of the international banking cartel's influence as a major player in the control system. The issuance of a nation's currency determines who is master and who is slave. The sovereign governments of this world have always had the legal option to issue their own currency without debt attached. Created in the treasury, it would trickle down through the system like blood in the veins of a nation, ensuring enough liquidity to lubricate the engines of industry without the burden of compounding interest. Unfortunately, most modern nations borrow money from private central banks with interest attached. This money is offered into circulation, forcing tax to be collected to pay off the nation's huge debt obligation. In the past, freeing the nation from debt slavery was a major campaign issue when seeking votes from the electorate. Something has changed. Now this topic rarely gets mentioned. Considering it's the main cause of most wars for the past 200 years, it should be at the top of the list. He who controls the money supply of a nation controls the nation. James Garfield. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people, to whom it properly belongs. Thomas Jefferson. History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. James Madison. If Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given to them to use themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations. Andrew Jackson. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Thomas Jefferson. Our whole monetary system is dishonest, as it is debt-based. We did not vote for it. It grew upon us gradually but markedly since 1971, when the commodities-based system was abandoned. The bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. William Paterson, founder of the Bank of England. The few who understand the system will either be so interested in its profits or be so dependent upon its favours that there will be no opposition from that class, while on the other hand, the great body of people mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantage that capital derives from this system will bear its burdens without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests. The Rothschild brothers of London. It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and money system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford. Most people believe the evolution of the control system has their best interests at heart. They consider the monetary system to be a carefully oiled machine which is designed to benefit the majority. When a nation borrows itself into debt, no matter how hard its citizens work, it can only sink further into debt. Each generation finds itself paying more tax for fewer services because of its inherent obligation to pay off the compounding interest on huge government borrowing. Disguised through inflation, the debt can never be repaid, as only the principal is sent into circulation. Eventually, when there is not enough money due to inflation-deflation manipulation, bankruptcies ensue, transferring tangible assets into the hands of the international financiers connected to the Ponzi scheme. History is full of examples of the dangers inherent in usury. Money changers and goldsmiths were regularly thrown out for exploiting their host nations. The modern banking system can be linked to the creation of the Bank of England in 1694, a private central bank which was set up to stabilise pricing and lend money to the government. With a panel of shareholders, the Bank of England would lend money on interest for empire building. While making the shareholders richer, the citizens were not only asked to fight in numerous conquests, but also required to pay the tax burden for the privilege. The partnership between the City of London's financiers and the government allowed the British Empire to eventually influence 1/3 of the globe, becoming the benchmark for other competing empires, all financed by a handful of banksters. This process turned these empires into tools for the objectives of the global financiers. Wars and invasions encouraged to line the pockets of the shareholders and to export influence. Like all loans, conditions would be attached, making the financiers masters over the borrower. In this case, it was the governments of each nation. The Rothschilds, the most influential banking family in history, began in a modest building in Frankfurt during the mid-17th century, eventually controlling most, if not all, private central banks. Much was written about the Rothschilds during the 19th century, but once they took control of the media and its outlets, they not only censored what was being said about them, but could now influence the steady social engineering of society towards a future based on Saturnian values of control and restrictions, promoting materialism over spirituality. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests controlled the majority of the newspapers and the columns in those papers to club into submission or drive out of office officials who refused to do the bidding of the powerful corrupt cliques which composed the invisible government. Theodore Roosevelt. By remaining behind the scenes, they, the Rothschilds, were able to avoid the brunt of public anger, which was directed instead at the political figures which they largely controlled. This is a technique which has been practiced by financial manipulators ever since, and it is fully utilized by those who operate the Federal Reserve System today. Edward Griffin. The Rothschilds belong to no one nationality. They are cosmopolitan. They belong to no party. They were ready to grow rich at the expense of friend and foe alike. When a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they, and not the leaders of the government, control the situation. Since the hand that gives is above the hand that takes, money has no motherland, financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain. Napoleon Bonaparte. One of the first things Hitler did when he came to power was to fix Germany's corrupt banking system, a system which had become infested with representatives working for the international banking cartel, who, like parasites, had sucked and plundered the country's wealth after its defeat in World War I. This led to hyperinflation and the country's bankruptcy. Hitler took back control of Germany's monetary system by issuing a new Reichsmark, a currency without debt attached, which cut out usury and the need for international finance. The decline of the post-World War I mark was caused by a clique of international financiers. The mark's dramatic devaluation began soon after the Reichsbank was privatized or delivered to private investors. The German government was not responsible for the post-war hyperinflation. It was Germany's privately owned central bank and its monopoly on the country's money creation, money created as a circulating note of debt, that created the problem. Germany's economy was crushed and devastated by the bankers. Once Hitler had freed Germany's banks from the parasitical clutches of international finance, he was able to reinvest all the money saved back into the German economy, expanding growth. This quickly propelled Germany from one of the poorest countries in Europe into one of the richest in just a few short years. This created two major problems for the international financiers, who already had the majority of the world's economies under their control. The first was that Germany's new prosperity, free from the shackles of debt, would only go from strength to strength. The second was that if the rest of the world, or at least those who thought they had an honest monetary system, found out what a scam they were living under, may also want to follow the German example by throwing out those banks who were keeping them in the trap of perpetual debt. Once Germany was able to issue its own currency without debt, it only took Hitler's National Socialist Party a few years to transform the country around. In 1933, Germany started its social revolution with 5.6 million unemployed. 5 years later, that figure had fallen to 0.4 million, possibly prompting Time magazine into naming Hitler Man of the Year in 1938. This period became known as the German economic miracle. Although Churchill was being sponsored to warn the world against German hegemony and rearmament, he once wrote about his admiration for Hitler's patriotic achievement. One may dislike Hitler's system and yet admire his patriotic achievement. If our country were defeated, I hope we should find a champion as indomitable to restore our courage and lead us back to our place among the nations. Winston Churchill. The Nazis came to power in 1933 when the German economy was in total collapse. With ruinous war reparation obligations and zero prospects for foreign investment or credit, through an independent monetary policy of sovereign credit and a full employment public works program, the Third Reich was able to turn a bankrupt Germany, stripped of overseas colonies, into the strongest economy in Europe within 4 years, even before armament spending began. Germany issued debt-free and interest-free money from 1935 on, which accounts for Germany's startling rise from the Depression to a world power in 5 years. The German government financed its entire operations from 1935 to 1945 without gold and without debt. It took the entire capitalist and communist world to destroy the German Revolution and bring Europe back under the heel of the bankers.